Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. And this is also the second half of this week's William Peter Blatty doubleheader. And my guest for The Exorcist III is Matt Braunger, a comic and actor you might have seen on Mad TV or Up All Night, or most recently as the cranky Dr. Samberly on Marvel's Agent Carter, which, so cool. His 2011 Shovel Fighter is streaming on Howl FM, his 2015 special Big Dumb Animal is streaming on Netflix, and he has a fun podcast of his own on Feral Audio, Ding Donger with Matt Braunger. It's just fun to say. The Exorcist III is Blatty's 1990 adaptation of his 1983 novel Legion, which finds the world-wearied Lieutenant Kinderman, who we first met in The Exorcist, confounded by a new wave of brutal murderers that bear the signature of an old serial killer, the Gemini. This would be easy to solve. In fact, I just solved it, except that the Gemini has been dead for more than a decade. And Kinderman's investigation will lead him into a darkness that's both metaphorical and literal, and force him to confront an ancient evil, while an enigmatic priest, played by Nicole Williamson, heads towards a confrontation of his own. I should warn you that the sound quality in this segment is less than optimal. We recorded it in a green room between sets earlier this year, and it was noisy there. I've done what I can to smooth it out, and it does settle down after a bit. And most importantly, Matt has some really interesting insights into The Exorcist III that makes the effort worth the effort. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It's one of those movies that I remember even when I saw it was not only like heart-rendingly terrifying, also really funny in parts.
Yeah.
And I really like movies that have that intelligence and have that thrill. And it's one of those movies I don't know why people don't talk about more.
Yeah, it kind of slipped through the cracks, didn't it? Like, I remember being really impressed in 1990 and then finding out that nobody but my friends and me had seen it.
Exactly. It didn't go anywhere. And, like, George C. Scott is one of those guys who was, like, to me, like a national treasure. Like you see him in The Hustler. He's such a demon in that movie. And he's just such a good bad guy. But then to him, he makes these really weird choices in the movie, which I really like when an actor just kind of goes out on a limb. You know, we have that scene where the guys are like, well, how do you know it's the Gemini back again? And he just, well, you shut your mouth! And he says it the weirdest time. And he's like, oof. And it's that moment of, I lost everything for a second. He was missing the finger from this hand. You know, there's that thing. Yeah. Then it goes into why he's so angry.
Yeah.
I just think it's, not a masterpiece, but in terms of horror, it's such a good movie to me.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe part of it is that actually, more importantly, when did you first see it? Did you see it theatrically?
I saw it in the theaters. Okay. Yeah, I was in high school. And I remember there's a time where I grew up, the first books I read were horror books. I think one of the first quote-unquote real books I actually read was The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't young adult fiction or anything like that.
We're old enough that there was no young adult. There was Bridge to Terabithia, and that was it.
Yeah. So so I've always been a fan of scary things, always. But I remember seeing like Misery with a bunch of friends in high school, and I don't remember who I saw Exorcist III with, but it was one of those things where, I think it's probably because of timing, where no one really cared so much about it. Now we look at The Exorcist as like this massive masterpiece, which it is, but I feel like at that time everyone had just kind of forgotten it.
Yeah, it was before that restoration, before it was reclaimed.
Yes.
And it was one of the first widescreen DVDs, and that was a big deal.
Right.
But I think the problem was at the time, like Exorcist II had taken the wind out of its sails so much.
Right.
And there was no appetite for it. And
right.
I think, too, horror had gone in that other direction with slasher movies, and like we drifted away.
For sure.
And then Blatty wrote Legion, and that was the thing that said, oh, yeah, there's still life in the property. I remember reading the book long before the film was made and just thinking, this is genuinely unsettling in a completely different way.
Yeah, for sure. And like I think a lot of it is kind of like my latent Catholic guilt. Okay. Like I'm long since lapsed from the church, but my parents are still involved, but they're also, they're kind of like progressive Catholics. But I remember finding out about the idea of hell and the idea of the devil when you're young. You're like, what the this is really messed up. This is a real thing. So you had those things. I loved The Omen. I literally, I think, checked my scalp for the 666 because I'm an only child, and very selfish, and
sure, you never know.
Wished harm upon my enemies, all that jazz. But like, I really liked those movies that would have like the devil as the ultimate villain, and it is an innate medieval silliness, even back beyond before, of having the evil one that's kind of like that. There's one figure doing that, which I guess that brings into question maybe the same thing's true of God, but having this guy who it was. I liked that it's almost like the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, where for this movie, where he's kind of like, when I met the old cruel ones, and you're like, oh, there's something else. It's not just Mephistopheles. You have these other guys, and they don't all have horns. They're not all like sitting in hell or whatnot. They're kind of basically
I can cut through this.
yeah, okay. They're kind of like it's just there are dimensions to evil that this guy, a serial killer, is drawing from.
And it is a weird perspective changer too, in that in The Exorcist, the devil is sort of dainty, and it may not be the devil. It refuses to acknowledge what he is, what it is. And then we find out in the second movie that it's Pazuzu, which is a silly name.
Yeah.
And then with the third one, you just go right back to the idea that there is a larger playing field. That was the thing that really... That was the thing that got to me about The Exorcist, is that it's, like it's shot like a documentary. It feels real, it feels raw, and it's all about a mother trying to save her kid, and the kid rebelling, and you could, like Stephen King has this whole thing in Danse Macabre about how you can read it as rebellion in the 60s and 70s coming back to bite itself on the ass. But what you get in Legion is this pristine, thoughtful, serious cinema, where everything is insane and there are levels that we can't conceive, and it's like this M.C. Escher mindscape with people running on ceilings. Like, it just try to explain it to somebody and you will be committed. It doesn't make sense, which is what's so unnerving.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like the devil's like supposedly the father of lies, and so it's supposed to be just everything's confusing. You don't know where you stand, which goes back to like. The most vivid portrayal of hell I ever read was the idea that all it is the absence of God.
Yeah.
Where you don't have any root, and you're just kind of adrift, which is horrifying.
That's like the most... I'm thinking about the end of the Rapture. Where you're denied God's love, and that is bad.
Right.
And you can see him, but he won't see you.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's... Ladies and gentlemen, listeners, we're cutting around some stuff.
Yeah.
But the tension of Legion is not, like, what fascinates me about the book and the movie in The Exorcist III is that it is not about whether evil is real.
Right.
People are dying left and right in horrible ways. Evil is very present. It's about how and why, and then the mystery of patient X. And everything else that's going on.
Yeah. I mean, and that actor who played Patient X was just incredible.
Brad Dourif.
Yeah.
The guy.
Yeah, he's so good, and he just sings like a choir boy at one point, and it's kind of like, and it's the thing when you. I remember I go to therapy, and I asked my therapist point blank, I'm like, am I a narcissist? And he's like, no. He's like, if you a clinical narcissist, if you look in their eyes, it's terrifying because there's nothing there. And I've read about therapists or psychologists talking with someone who is, a full-on sociopath or psychopath, and when you kind of go, I see you. Like, I know what you're doing. I know you. They flip. That's when they attack you.
Okay.
And so that's when the guards grab them and stuff. Where it's this thing of like, as long as they keep up the facade, and you see that in the movie where it's kind of like, I love to talk. I love to have people listen to me, kind of thing. But he did such a great job with that. Yeah. Where it's like where does that go? Where does that psychosis kind of go? And what is a person who is a tool, because he's obviously like, well, this is what I am, this is what I enjoy, I love inflicting pain and I love killing people, so I'm going to be a monkey wrench for this bigger thing, which is horrifying, and I really hope it's not real. I don't think it is. I don't think the universe has that kind of literature that we try to give it.
Yeah.
Us as human beings, we often try to be like, well, we figured it out, and we're like, we're fucking ants.
It's all chaos and darkness.
It's all chaos and darkness, but there is order and chaos. There are patterns, but I feel like it's almost like if you actually saw the face of God, you'd explode, kind of thing.
Right.
I feel like that whoever came up with that was a genius, because if we ever learned the secrets of the universe, our brains would explode. We're not equipped.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, I mean, that's the flip side of Lovecraft, right? Like, you see the other gods and you go insane. You can't conceive of it. And The Exorcist and Exorcist III, alone in those films, in the properties, because 2 and 4 and 4B, or whatever you want to call it, they made 2 of those. They don't acknowledge the things that the Blatty scripted films acknowledge, which is that the only reason we are privy to any of this is because something is trying to make us stop believing. Like, because that's what it wants. It wants us to stop believing in God.
Sure.
And that's why I can't believe in this abbreviated episode we have to jump into the director's cut versus the producer's cut. Like, the final theatrical release has an exorcism, and the director's cut, recently recovered and released on Blu-ray, doesn't.
Wow.
That's the big difference, because apparently Morgan Creek Productions, having made Legion, said, oh no, it's called The Exorcist III now, it has to have an exorcism. So they added the Nicole Williamson character, Father Morning, and they have an exorcism in the end. But that gets us to the speech that George C. Scott gives, I believe in you, which means God's real too. Which is like the core of everything Blatty has ever worked for. I find it absolutely fascinating that he was forced into writing that.
That's amazing.
Because it was all just supposed to be subtext, and they're like, no, it has to be engaged with. And of course it does, because with horror, right, like, you can have subtext, but then you still have to have the payoff. And that exorcism sequence, while ultimately, yes, it's meaningless within the concept of the larger film about the psychological debate, the ethical debate within Kinderman, we need to have that speech. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, to find out that wasn't part of the original plan. I just assumed when I saw the movie, it's like, oh, well, he figured out he had to make it more cinematic somehow, because the ending of the book is quieter, and the ending of the director's cut, similarly, is just a yelling match. And this is, oh no, I see. Like, you have to be shown the devil to understand that if the devil exists, then he must have been, like, the Lucifer stuff is all true, therefore God is real. I've always been fascinated by that conflict in movies where, you know, a friend of mine refuses to accept movies like The Exorcist or The Prophecy or Constantine because they involve canon religious mythology. And he doesn't believe at all. And he's like, well, I can't accept it. That's all silly. It's not real. It's like, okay, but it's real in the movie. Like,
that's exactly how I feel. Like, I really bristle when people, like, I really would, this will probably never happen in our lifetimes, but I would love it if someone did the same thing from a Muslim perspective, or a strictly Orthodox Jewish perspective, or Buddhist, like, whatever their demon would be, and be like, but, you know, their deity, their higher power kind of has to combat it, or the people that, you know, and just because I know people would lose their minds. Because it's this thing where in the cinematic world, in the Western world, we're like, well, yeah, but come on, we all know Jesus is God. And it's kind of like, all right, take it easy. Like, I just feel like God has many names. You might not believe in God, and we don't even know. Who knows? God might not exist. But yeah, you're right. It exists in the film. I just would love many more perspectives, many more of these kind of, because I think they're fun. How do you make a plot better? Raise the stakes. And there are no higher stakes.
That's true.
You know, than the Almighty.
There is a Jewish horror movie, fairly recently one, too, called The Unborn, which nobody remembers because it was terrible. But it has Gary Oldman as a priest. No, Gary Oldman as a rabbi and Idris Elba as a priest, I want to say. Fighting, like, conducting an exorcism at the end of this movie over the body of Odette Yustman from Cloverfield, who is about to give birth to a monster. And the monster, it's a Dybbuk story.
Oh, yeah, sure, a Dybbuk.
But they call it Jumbi. And you're just like, no, that's stupid.
No.
There is no monster called Jumbi. Jumbi's not scary. And they keep saying Jumbi wants to be born. It's like, nope, stupid. Not scared of you.
Yeah, Jumbi. There's a book I read called I think it's called The Genie and the Golem, that is a kind of industrial age America, and a genie from the Middle East is basically transported. He gets, you know, tricked into into his Valis or whatever, and gets transported and gets out, a being of pure fire, and then a guy goes to, at the same time, a rabbi who dabbles in the dark arts, who makes him a wife, makes him a golem.
Okay.
And on the steamship, this guy dies, and so the golem comes to life out of her box, and has no master, has nothing, and is basically a being that is, of human form, but has immense physical power. So you basically have almost Colossus from X-Men, but female, and this guy who can make things go catch fire like right away and stuff. And they kind of find each other as these strange beings. It's a really good book, and I was like, this should be a cool movie.
I would watch that
because it's the immigrant story times 10.
With superpowers,
right? Exactly,
and destructive power.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That sounds fascinating.
Yes.
Before we run out of time, which is going to be any minute now,
yes.
Two things. I have to ask about the big scare scene, which is the thing that no one can talk about because it's almost incomprehensible.
Ball constricting.
Yeah. What is it, like a 3-minute take that just ends with a 20-second punchline of sheer terror? How did it play in your room? Because my room, basically, I think somebody passed out.
Oh yeah, I lost mine. I felt my heart seize up. The fact that it not only you just see this hallway the whole time, and then it cuts to the attacker has a sheet over their face.
The most disturbing thing, right? When you can't see.
They can't even see, and they're just striding. They're like shot out of a cannon, but slowly, while this woman is facing the other way, and they've already set up the thing of the surgical thing that like can cut any bone in half, right like that. Yeah, that is to me the most terrifying moment in film. I think the most the biggest start
It's up there. I mean, every time I watch it, I forget the timing, and so because I can't remember, it's like the rape gag. It gets less scary and then scarier again. Because I know it's still I've seen the movie. I know it's coming, and I can't remember the structure of it. And it's like, why is it? Oh, it's now. No, it's not. Oh shit. So is it? And then it just
it takes so long. I've seen it a couple of times.
The control to do that.
Because she looks in the room. She checks it. Nobody in there. It's. I feel like that's the simplest horror moments that make you jump are the moments where they were under a table the whole time. That kind of thing. You looked and you felt safe, and you were not safe at all.
It's the fact that Blatty had only made one other movie as a director, and that he came up with that, or that someone helped him and he let the idea happen. However it mattered, it doesn't matter. However it happened, it's ingenious and terrifying, and 27 years later, pants shittingly effective.
Yes.
It's really great. If you have not seen The Exorcist III, you still won't be prepared for this, even though we just talked about it.
I didn't want to explain too much. But
it's like
you won't see it coming.
It's the thing. Go look it up on YouTube. It won't help you.
Nope.
It's still there.
Nope. Yeah.
And so then, yes, because we only have so much time, the final question, always the same on the podcast, which is that have you stolen, lifted, borrowed? Is there anything of The Exorcist III that's made it into your creative DNA as a performer?
Oh, interesting. Just anything I've written in a script. Most of the stuff I write is kind of funny, but I find, and I will say some of the stories I tell, the vignettes or whatnot, I'm much more a storytelling-based comedian. A lot of them are scary. A lot of them are funny now because they were terrifying then.
Right.
The most downloaded joke I have is called, I think, The Ghost of the Two-Man Party, where myself and a friend got drunk together and did not know a homeless girl was just we're staying in a house, and we thought it was a ghost.
Yes.
And we
it's
went
on Shovel Fire.
It's on Shovel Fire, yeah. And that's because that's one of those things where you go, oh, okay, it's people love it because it's horrifying. And it's one of those things you still think back and you go, oh God, there was a human being in the house we didn't know that was there the whole time. I feel like there's it's funny if you make it out. if you're safe,
Yeah, if you defeat the demon.
Yes.
My thanks to Matt Braunger, who has his own podcast, Ding Donger with Matt Braunger. See, it is fun to say, over on Feral Audio. You can also find his special Big Dumb Animal streaming on Netflix and his album Shovel Fighter streaming on Howl FM. You can also find his tour dates at mattbraunger.com, which you should definitely do because he is an absolutely phenomenal stand-up. You can find Matt on Twitter at Braunger, and you can find The Exorcist III on DVD and Blu-ray from Warner Home Entertainment and in that Blu-ray special edition I mentioned from Scream Factory. The theatrical cut is also available for sale and rental on iTunes and Google Play, but only in the US, though it is also streaming on Shudder. If this is the first time you've heard this podcast, don't forget to go back and listen to Adam Barken's episode on the Ninth Configuration, the other half of this week's Blatty Double Bill. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. The power of Christ, oh, you know. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.